Beneath the frozen skies of the Ice Age, survival was never only about food, fire, or shelter. It was about faith. To these ancient tribes, the world was alive with spirits. The mammoth was not merely prey, but a sacred being. Fire was not just warmth, but a messenger from the divine. And the very winds howling across glaciers were voices of ancestors guiding the living. Rituals were their shield against fear, chants their way of bending destiny, and symbols painted on cave walls, their prayers frozen in time. But what exactly did these people believe? Were their rituals acts of survival, visions of the spirit world, or codes of memory meant to outlive them? Step by step, I will take you inside the hidden world of their beliefs, where survival and spirituality became one. The Ice Age was not just a time of survival. It was a crucible where the very foundations of human spirituality and ritual were forged, where firelight flickered against cave walls and shadows seemed to dance with meanings beyond the ordinary, and where people, huddled together under animal skins, whispered to one another about spirits they could not see but felt in every icy gust of wind and every howl of the wolves outside. Imagine stepping into that world where the environment was unforgiving, where glaciers stretched across the horizon like walls of frozen death, where mammoths roamed and saber-toothed cats prowled. And yet, amid all this, humans were not merely surviving, they were dreaming, imagining, and building the first layers of belief that would later become the cornerstones of religion and culture. For an Ice Age tribe, survival depended not just on spears and fire, but also on meaning, because without meaning, fear became unbearable, and without rituals, chaos ruled the mind. Thus, they began to see the world as alive with forces beyond themselves, spirits dwelling in rivers, animals carrying souls, mountains standing as guardians, and the night sky glowing with ancestors who watched over them. The flicker of flames inside caves was more than warmth, it was a sacred connection. A doorway to stories where hunters became heroes, where animals gave themselves as sacrifices, and where unseen powers could be invoked for protection. The bones of hunted creatures were arranged with care, painted symbols were etched onto walls, and drums fashioned from hide-beat rhythms that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself. And slowly, belief was born, not as an abstract philosophy, but as a living necessity, a survival tool that gave courage in the face of blizzards, death, and hunger. One of the earliest signs of these beliefs comes from Ice Age burials, and here, the evidence speaks volumes. Archaeologists have uncovered graves where bodies were not simply discarded but carefully placed, surrounded by red ochre, beads, tools, and bones of animals. Why such care for the dead if not to honor a journey beyond? To the people of the Ice Age, death was not an end but a passage, and the rituals they performed suggest they believed in a world beyond the visible, one where ancestors lived on and perhaps influenced the living. Red ochre, for instance, smeared onto the dead symbolized blood, life, and rebirth. It was their way of painting eternity onto fragile bodies, their silent promise that life would not simply vanish into the cold earth. Graves were sometimes lined with antlers, tusks, or skulls of great beasts, almost as if the spirits of these animals were guardians, guides, or companions in the journey beyond. To modernize, these practices appear mystical, but to Ice Age tribes, they were as essential as fire and food. They offered comfort, hope, and order in a world that constantly threatened to strip away meaning. But the Ice Age was not only about death rituals, it was about daily connections to the spiritual world that infused every hunt, every gathering, and every night under the stars. Imagine a hunting party preparing to track a mammoth. Before they even raised their spears, they might gather in a circle, chanting, painting symbols on their bodies with ash, invoking the spirit of the beast they sought. To them, the hunt was not just a contest of strength, it was a sacred exchange, a negotiation with the spirit world, because animals were not mere resources but beings with souls, capable of giving or withholding themselves. The paintings on cave walls, herds of bison, horses, mammoths drawn in layers of ochre and charcoal were not decorations but invocations, magical acts meant to bind the spirit of the animal to the will of the tribe. When hunters gazed at those painted beasts by firelight, the animals seemed to move, to breathe, to charge forward, and in that moment, reality blurred with belief. Art became ritual, and imagination became a weapon against despair. Caves themselves were sacred sanctuaries, wombs of stone where humans entered not just to hide from storms, but to connect with the unseen. Deep inside, far from sunlight, they lit torches and created worlds on the walls, filling them with symbols we still struggle to decode. Spirals, dots, handprints pressed against stone, half human, half mammoth figures. All of these point to a spirituality that merged the human and the otherworldly. Some scholars believe shamans, spiritual leaders of the tribes, entered these caves to perform rituals using chants, dances, and perhaps even hallucinogenic plants to journey into altered states of consciousness where they claim to meet spirits. Ancestors or animal guides? These shamans were the mediators between the tribe and the unseen forces that governed life and death. Their visions shaped decisions, their rituals bound the community together, and their words carried the weight of survival. To ignore them was to risk disaster, because in the harsh ice age, every edge, whether physical or spiritual, could mean the difference between life and extinction. Even fire itself was more than warmth. It was a sacred force, a gift from the heavens or from spirits, a living entity that demanded respect. Fire ceremonies likely included offerings, bits of food, fat, or bone tossed into the flames, not wasted but given to the spirits as thanks. Around firelight, stories became rituals, and rituals became stories. Myths of creation, of heroic hunters, of spirits in the wind and ancestors in the stars were told and retold, binding generations together with shared meaning. The act of storytelling itself was sacred. It was how memory became eternal, how lessons of survival turned into songs of belief, and how even children came to see their world as alive with hidden powers. And beyond the tribe's circle, nature itself was a temple. The stars overhead, patterns etched into the cold night sky, were maps not just of direction but of destiny. Constellations may have been seen as great animals or spirits guiding the tribes across snowy plains. The moon's cycles marked time, its waxing and waning linked to fertility, to hunts, to the rhythm of life itself. Rivers, mountains, and glaciers were more than landscapes. They were deities. Guardians, beings whose moods could bless or curse. To cross a frozen river may have required a whispered prayer. To face a storm may have demanded a chant for protection. To find a new cave may have sparked a ritual of cleansing. Everything was infused with spirit, and every act carried weight. Thus, when we look at the Ice Age tribes, we do not see simple hunters and gatherers. We see the architects of meaning, the first dreamers who turned survival into spirituality, who created rituals that bound them not just to each other, but to the mysteries of the universe itself. Their world was one where every breath carried significance, every shadow hinted at presence, and every ritual linked the fragile human body to the vast, terrifying, and beautiful forces of nature. These were not people living without belief, they were people who could not live without it. And this was only the beginning, because as we journey deeper into their rituals, we will uncover stranger practices, darker mysteries and secrets of the Ice Age that still echo in our modern religions, myths, and dreams. Step into the frozen silence of the Ice Age, and you will find that survival was never just a matter of hunting, fire, or shelter. It was inseparably tied to belief, ritual, and the invisible threads of spirituality that wove tribes together in the face of merciless, cold, and constant danger. For to the Ice Age hunter-gatherer, every element of the world was alive with unseen forces. The mammoth was not only prey, but a guardian spirit whose death demanded respect. The bison carried strength that had to be honored through chants and paintings. The cave bear was both feared and revered as a powerful presence, while fire itself was never regarded as a tool alone, but as a living messenger, a bridge between the human and the divine, glowing in the darkness like a voice from beyond. Archaeologists uncovering ochre-painted bones, carvings etched into antlers, and mysterious handprints deep within caves now realize these were not random markings of bored hunters, but deliberate acts of ritual, attempts to communicate with the unseen, to preserve knowledge and to balance the fragile line between life and death. Because in a world where the wrong step meant being torn apart by a saber tooth or freezing under glacial skies, people needed more than weapons. They needed meaning, order, and hope. And this was provided by shamans, figures who stood at the center of spiritual life. Men and women who entered trance states induced by rhythmic drumming, flickering firelight, and perhaps even mind-altering plants, their bodies shaking, voices chanting, as they claimed to walk between the realms of the living and the spirits. Imagine the scene, a narrow cave, its walls painted with mammoths, horses, and bison. The air thick with smoke, shadows stretching and dancing as if alive. The shamans chant rising higher until the entire group feels carried into a different world, the children gazing with wide eyes, learning that survival is not only about spears, but about harmony with powers they cannot see. The symbols painted here were more than art. They were prayers, guides, and warnings, maps of spiritual landscapes as important as any trail across snow or ice. And these rituals bound people together in a unity stronger than hunger or fear. For to hunt without giving thanks was to risk disaster, to travel without signs from the spirits was to wander into death, and to ignore ritual was to invite despair so crushing it could break even the strongest hunter. Yet evidence shows these beliefs were not only about daily survival, but about the greatest mystery of all, death itself. For archaeologists have uncovered burials from Ice Age sites where bodies were carefully positioned, sprinkled with red ochre, surrounded by tools, weapons, and ornaments, as though these people believed the spirit would need them in another world. And in this careful preparation we glimpse the roots of religion, the belief in an afterlife, the idea that death was not an end but a passage, and that the dead remained connected to the living through ritual. The power of ritual extended to every aspect of life, from seasonal ceremonies marking the return of the sun after endless winters to symbolic carvings on bones that may have represented lunar cycles, an early attempt to track time and harmonize human life with cosmic rhythms. And as new discoveries from caves like Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira reveal, the very walls of the Ice Age became canvases of faith, places where tribes left their spiritual fingerprints for us to uncover thousands of years later. But the true depth of these beliefs goes beyond art and burial, because to these tribes, the natural world itself was sacred. Rivers whispered guidance, stones carried memory, and animals served as teachers and messengers, so that hunting was never simply killing but a ritualized exchange, a gift of life taken with reverence and returned through offerings, chants, and dances, transforming every act of survival into a ceremony of balance. The shaman's role was central in maintaining this balance, for they claimed to interpret dreams, cure illness, and speak with animal spirits, and their authority was not based on force but on visions, respected as intermediaries between the human and the spiritual, yet always walking the edge of danger. For to misinterpret a sign or fail in ritual was to endanger the tribe itself. Even in the silence of endless glaciers, loneliness and despair threatened to break the human spirit, but ritual turned emptiness into meaning, chants into courage, and firelight into connection, binding people together in a shared story of survival and belief. And so we begin to see that Ice Age tribes did not just fight against nature, they cooperated with it through imagination, ritual, and spirituality, transforming harsh survival into sacred purpose. And this, as astonishing as it may sound, is only the first glimpse into their spiritual universe, because as we move further, I will uncover how their rituals expanded into seasonal gatherings, how symbolic burials hint at a belief in souls and afterlife, and how these people in the depths of the Ice Age were already shaping the foundations of myth, religion, and culture that echo through humanity to this very day. When we journey back into the unforgiving world of the Ice Age, where glaciers stretched like endless walls of ice and survival was measured in heartbeats against the cold, we find that early humans were not only hunters and gatherers, but also believers, visionaries, and storytellers who saw the world around them as more than physical. It was alive with spirits, forces, and mysteries demanding both respect and ritual. Imagine tribes huddled around flickering fires, their breath rising into the night air as smoke, chanting in rhythm to the crackle of burning wood, convinced that the flames were not mere warmth but living messengers carrying prayers to unseen gods. And as shadows danced on cave walls, these flickers of light became more than decoration. They transformed into sacred theaters where myth and survival merged, where painted mammoths, bison, and reindeer galloped across stone, not just as animals but as spiritual symbols believed to hold power over life and death. And here lies the first truth. Ice Age rituals were not luxuries but necessities, psychological weapons against despair, a way of turning chaos into meaning. And though we can only glimpse fragments through cave paintings, burial sites, and scattered artifacts, these fragments whisper loudly of a people whose entire existence was entwined with belief. To these tribes, animals were never only prey, but sacred beings, slain with reverence. Their bones arranged in deliberate patterns, their skulls placed at cave entrances like guardians or offerings, suggesting that the hunt itself was a ritual, an act of negotiation with the spirit world rather than brute conquest. And this is something I will reveal even more deeply as we move forward. For the mammoth was not simply meat, it was memory, myth, and magic combined, its presence woven into songs and chants that taught children respect for the cycle of life. Burial sites, too, tell us much. Graves filled with beads carved from ivory, red ochre sprinkled over bones like symbolic blood, tools placed beside the dead as if preparing them for journeys beyond, all of which prove that Ice Age humans believed death was not an ending but a passage to another realm where spirits walked, a realm that demanded preparation through ritual. And I will soon explain how these practices mirror later spiritual traditions across cultures. At the heart of their beliefs lay the shaman, the figure who bridged the world of the living with the unseen, who entered trances under the rhythm of drums or the flicker of firelight, guided by herbs, chants, and visions. And in these altered states, the shaman saw spirits of animals, ancestors, and elemental forces, returning to the tribe with guidance, healing, or warnings. And while we cannot know every detail, cave paintings of half-human, half-animal figures suggest this role was not only real but central to the very survival of the group. Yet rituals were not confined to individuals. They were collective acts of unity, binding people together when hunger, cold, and predators threatened to tear them apart. Imagine dozens gathered in a cave, chanting, stamping feet in rhythm, drums echoing against stone, firelight breathing life into painted animals until they seemed to move. A spectacle so immersive it was perhaps the world's first theater, first church, and first classroom all in one. And these gatherings were not simply entertainment but survival strategies, reinforcing bonds, sharing knowledge, and giving courage when despair lurked close. But why did these rituals matter so deeply? Because in a world where blizzards could erase entire valleys overnight and predators lurked in the darkness, humans needed more than spears. They needed stories, symbols, and faith to endure. And this is a point I will expand further as we progress, for without belief the Ice Age would have crushed the human spirit long before it crushed the human body. Even symbols themselves carried spiritual weight spirals, dots, and zigzags carved into bones and cave walls recur across continents, suggesting a shared visual language, a protoscript of meaning that connected survival with spirituality. And perhaps these were not only decorations but coded prayers, maps of memory or sacred signs of protection. And later I will show you why these symbols matter far beyond their time. Handprints on cave walls speak just as loudly, some positive, some negative, each one a declaration of existence. I was here, I mattered, I am part of this story. And in these hands we see the roots of identity, community, and spirituality itself, where leaving a mark was not vanity but ritual, a way of binding one's spirit to the eternal. And so, as we peel back the layers of Ice Age belief, we realize these people were not primitive but profoundly sophisticated, blending survival with symbolism, ritual with reality, crafting a worldview where nothing was meaningless, where every hunt was a prayer, every burial a passage, every chant a shield against the unknown. And yet this is only the beginning, because as we move deeper into this exploration, I will reveal how these practices evolved into mythologies, how rituals shaped leadership, and how spirituality itself became a survival tool that carried humanity out of the Ice Age and into the dawn of civilization. In the end, the spiritual beliefs and rituals of Ice Age tribes were far more than simple traditions. They were lifelines, shaping how our ancestors faced fear, found meaning, and held their communities together against impossible odds. In every chant, every painting, and every burial offering, they left behind proof that survival was not only about the body, but also the spirit. And even today, their whispers remind us that imagination, ritual, and belief have always been humanity's greatest tools for endurance.